So hello to all of you guys that have joined already. A warm welcome to all. We're very excited to officially kick off this 24th EMAN conference. I can see already a lot of you guys coming from across the world. I've even seen someone from Australia. So good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining from. Today we are going to be talking about resilience. This will be the topic of the event, and we've got an exciting day ahead for you. Before we officially get started on to the interesting discussions, I am going to go through some very quick information for you to be aware for the rest of the day. What you can see now on the slide is the hosts that you will have throughout the day. You're lucky to have amazing hosts that will be helping you. We have, of course, Rodney Aaron, Managing Director of WBCSD, Professor and Dr. Karen Maas, EMAN Chair, and finally myself, Katja, and my colleague Johanna, both associates at WBCSD, will be really the main contact points for any questions you may have throughout the day, whether it's around the event or any technical issues you may have. So don't hesitate to write us any private messages if needed. So I know we've all been connecting through Zoom a lot lately, and I'm sure we're all quite familiar with this now, but it's always good to just remind some very basic housekeeping rules. So as you know, we will be using Zoom throughout the day. So just so that you're aware, it's important for you to be connecting through the Zoom app or your computer. The reason being that we will be using interactive features such as breakout rooms. And for you to be able to take part in those kind of features, you need to be onto the app or the computer. In another way of saying, just don't join by dialing in. I've also already mentioned into the chat, and for those that are joining now, it would be great if you can please change your username. If you go into the list of participants, find your name, you should then have an option to click on more. And once you click on the more option, you should have a rename option. Please make sure to have your first and last name as well as your organization. This will be really helpful for everyone on the event to be able to network if they wish, and also so that we can allocate you into the right morning session later on. We're going to be using the chat function also throughout the day. So if you have any reflections that you wish to share, any questions, don't hesitate to use that function. It should be on the bottom tab of your Zoom. We encourage all of you guys to share throughout the day. We can all learn from each other, so please don't hesitate to ask questions, share your experiences. We'll be happy to learn from you. Finally, our event is being recorded at the moment, and all of the slides as well as the recording will be made available onto the EMAN event website after the event. So I also just need to kindly remind you that, and this is something we have to remind in every WBCSD event, that we operate under an antitrust provisions. So we invite you to avoid to take part in any discussions of competitively sensitive topics, such as the ones that are listed on the slide at the moment. So we'd appreciate if you can please be sensitive to that. Now over to a bit more exciting aspects, the agenda for today. So what you see here is the program that we currently have for the morning part. So we're soon going to have a chance to hear from Professor Rodney Aaron, who will be welcoming you all of you, and will also take a little moment to introduce himself. We'll then have the chance to hear from Karen Maas, who will officially kick off this 24th EMAN conference. And then you will have a choice between two morning breakout sessions. A lot of you have voiced out the choice of breakout session you wish to be in, and we appreciate that. We will therefore be allocating you to that choice that you have shared with us. For those of you that haven't filled out the survey, I'm afraid that you will simply be allocated randomly in one of those sessions, but don't worry, both of them will be highly interesting. So we'll have a first morning session around valuation and reporting, and the second session will be around looking ahead with COVID-19, and an interesting session around TCFD and risks. We'll then all come back in plenary to share key insights from each morning sessions before we then go for a quick lunch break. Just quickly onto the morning sessions, we're going to be using breakout rooms. You don't have to do anything. You will automatically be allocated into the room of your choice. Again, now I'd like to also quickly share the amazing speakers we will have this morning. I'm not going to introduce them now. You will have a chance to be introduced to them during the morning sessions. But just to highlight that we've got an amazing panel here, a nice mixture of business representatives, but also academics. So I wish to also thank all of these speakers today who have put a lot of time and effort in preparing their respective sessions. Quick words about the program for the afternoon. So again, we are going to have 3 different afternoon workshop sessions. There as well, you've had a chance to voice out the ones you wish to be in, and you should have also received separate Zoom links. So this is very important to keep in mind. Once we go into the afternoon, you need to make sure that you join the respective link for each session, and I'll get back to that in just a bit. After we've had the afternoon breakout sessions, we're going to have a chance to have a quick coffee break before we all come back again onto this main Zoom link for the EMAN event to share key highlights from each sessions. We're then going to have a very interesting session from Sue Farmer on what it means to build personal resilience. We're going to be talking a lot about business resilience, but I think we've all learned through COVID that personal resilience is just as important. And so we'll have a chance to get some very interesting insights from Sue Farmer on that. And finally, we'll be wrapping up the EMAN event by sharing final key learnings and wrap up that we'll have a chance to get from Rodney and Karen before ending the event at 5:40 sharp. And then finally, we of course all invite you to then join for virtual networking drinks, which is of course optional, but I think it'll be a lot of fun. So please join us for that as well. It'll be very informal, just a really good chance to continue interesting discussions after the event. Now, this is a reminder again, at the moment we are on the main event, EMAN event Zoom link. And what you can see is for each afternoon workshop, you have separate Zoom links. Don't worry, we will make sure to send those separate Zoom links again into the chat here for you to have them. Just make sure that you use that separate Zoom link for joining one of those afternoon workshops. And then finally, when we all come back in plenary after the afternoon workshops, please use again the main EMAN Zoom link that you're on at the moment. So that is it for me. I would like to now pass on to Ronnie, who's going to share some welcoming words. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katja, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Wherever you are in the world, you're very welcome to this EMAN conference. This year, it was my turn to host, and unfortunately, COVID-19 made us have to rethink the whole conference. We should have been in Geneva. You probably would have been unable to move after your fondue last night, but the reality of the 2020 world has meant that we're doing this virtually. And I think it's important that we did do this virtually, so that we bring, as WBCSD, as a member of EMAN, wants to bring the academic and practitioners together. For those of you that were able to join us in 2015 in Geneva, you'll know that I'm very passionate about applied research and about research that can further our agenda when it comes to making the world a more sustainable place. And today is still an opportunity for that networking and for bringing the academic and business perspectives to the challenges that we have in 2020. Now, for those of you that are new to the WBCSD, just very quickly, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, and we represent over 200 of the world's leading companies, particularly progressive companies, around a common vision for creating a world in where 9+ billion people will all be living well by 2020 within the boundaries of the planet. And our organization is structured around big economic system changes, transformations. And you can see that in this visual that those transformations are focused on, sustainable development goals under our people program, where we also look at human rights, we look at diversity and inclusion, etc. Circular economy, and particularly the issue of plastic waste, is another big thematic area that we are focused on, as well as cities and mobility, looking at how we'll all live together in the future and how we'll move from A to B. Of course, climate and energy was supposed to be a big year for COP26, all delayed until next year. But our work on climate and energy is helping not only with helping companies transition to a low carbon economy, but also dealing with the policy interventions that are needed to make that possible. And of course, food and nature. Nature will always win, as they say, but humanity is making a fair attempt at having its way. And COVID has also showed us that the fragility of food systems and the supply chains that we all depend on. At the middle of all of this is the program that I lead called Redefining Value, which is focused on measurement, valuation, and reporting, hence the connection with the EMAN network. So in our work, we're always wanting to make more sustainable businesses more successful. And to be able to have that aspiration, we need to explore this notion of resilience. Whilst this was not the topic that we had when we planned this event a year ago, I'm afraid it's the topic we need to be focused on now. So what is it? What is resilience? What does it mean as an individual, but also as a business? The term itself comes from psychology, usually around an individual, but it's becoming more and more used in the business world. So we're going to be making this as interactive as possible today. And so we're going to start with our first interactive question. So we could go to our Menti slide, please. So what I'd like you to do is, if you have a computer, a phone, or anything that's near you, I would like you to go to the internet browser and go to www.menti.com. And there you'll be prompted to add in a code. And today's code is 9796765. And what I'd like you to do is type in the word or phrase that defines resilience for you, what it means for you. So I'll give you a few seconds to do that. And here we start to see all of the terms coming in. Dynamic, perseverance, adaptability, forward-looking, flexibility, dynamic, capacity, recovery, robustness. Yeah. Well, today, as part of our conference, we're going to be exploring what this can mean for everybody, both at a personal level. So we're going a little bit off the normal script for an EMAN conference and looking at you as individuals and how can we make sure that by the end of today, you have a little bit more understanding of how resilient you are and what tips and techniques you can deploy to help improve your resilience. So there's a personal element to today's journey, but there's also what does it mean for the business community. So what is resilience? Well, resilience, according to the American Psychological Society, is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. And later on today, we'll examine that whole word stress because we use it a lot. But what does it really mean and how do we know when it's happening? It means, according to the American Psychological Association, bouncing back from difficult experience. The term is mostly, as I said, associated with psychology, but as I also said, we're seeing this term appear more and more in the business lexicon. And it's replacing, in some cases, the word risk management. Being resilient doesn't mean that a person or a business doesn't have trouble or distress. The road to resilience is likely to involve considerable emotional or operational distress. And resilience is not a trait that people or businesses either have to do or either have or do not have. It involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed in anyone. So if we look at the factors in resilience, when putting this conference together, I wanted to share with you what the factors are and also show you how in today's conference we're going to try and address them. So the factors in resilience are a combination of factors that contribute to us being more resilient. And many studies have shown that the primary factor in resilience is having supportive relationships. So today we'll be looking at your own individual relationships, but also how you can improve those relationships. And this conference in many ways will allow you to broaden your network. Relationships that create trust, provide role models, and offer encouragement and reassurance often help to bolster resilience as well. And there are several factors that are associated with resilience, including the capacity to make realistic plans and the steps needed to carry them out. Now that's applicable to an individual or to a business. A positive view of yourself or your brand, and confidence in your strengths and abilities. Skills in communicating and problem solving, the capacity to manage strong feelings and impulses. And all of these factors people can develop, our businesses can develop. So the 10 points that we will focus on today that come from the American Association or Psychological Associations is make connections. So I encourage you today, through the chat, through the conversations that you'll have, the networking opportunities, is make more connections, create a good, solid infrastructure and network. Avoid seeing crises as insurmountable problems. As Winston Churchill famously said, never waste a good crisis, but avoid seeing them as insurmountable. We'll all get through this, is what we are all hearing. Accept that change is part of living, and we at the WBCSD have been very adaptive, and I'm sure all of you that are either in businesses or in academia have had to react very quickly to the evolving landscape. And for those of you that are going to be welcoming students back into your classroom shortly, or have had already done so, you already have probably adapted your practice. Move towards your goals. Remember that this year is exceptional, but at the same time, we still have goals, and a very simple goal will be to get through it and come out of it better and stronger. But not acknowledging to move towards that goal is powerful. Take decisive actions. And I think that's been one of the challenges, is people have maybe felt overwhelmed this year. Businesses have felt overwhelmed with the uncertainty that COVID-19 and different government interventions have created. But it helps to be resilient if you can take decisive actions. Look for opportunities for self-discovery. I think that's been a big lesson for me personally over the last 6 months. As I've no longer been on an airplane traveling around the world, I've been looking more at myself and thinking, is this really what I want? How can I explore myself and make my lot better? And also today on the agenda, look for those opportunities as well. Next is nurture a positive view of yourself. And I've heard from a number of colleagues and from my network that people's confidence have been somewhat knocked. The same with business. Some business outlooks have been knocked. But creating that positive view doesn't cost anything, so why not nurture it? And keep things into perspective. Remember that 99% of the population will not be affected by the current pandemic to the extent that perhaps their fears would indicate they will be. So keeping things in perspective as possible. Maintain a hopeful outlook, because we will get through it. And finally, take care of yourself. So over the rest of today, hydrate, contribute, and enjoy what we put together for you. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Karen, the new chair of EMAN. So Karen, very welcome.
Thanks, Rodney. So welcome all. I'm very, very happy to see you all online. And although it's a pity that we cannot meet each other face to face, because that brings, of course, a different angle to discussions, but still being online is also having a positive impact. We have a lot of registrants today, so hopefully a lot of people will join us. And that shows us that we are discussing a tremendously important topic, being resilient, and also building resilience in times of crisis. So my name is Karen Maas, and I'm Professor of Accounting and Sustainability at the Open University. And I'm also heading a research center at Erasmus University, which is called Impact Center Erasmus. So you see more or less all the logos online. And since last year, I have had the honor to become the chair of the EMAN network. So EMAN stands for Environmental and Sustainability Management Accounting Network. And I've became chair after 25 years of leadership by a former chair, Professor Schaltegger. So I think he has had the opportunity, but also made it possible to build the EMAN network into the network it is today. So every few years, we organize a conference together with the Business Council, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And we have a specific focus during those conferences, and that is to bring academics and practitioners together to discuss contemporary knowledge. So we as academics try to bring to the practitioners, but also to gain more insights into the recent and the new challenges practice is actually struggling with. So topics related to sustainability, of course, but also management accounting, measurement, reporting, and all those topics related to it. So what is the role of business and other organizations actually to build this sustainable world? And I've always been in a position between those two worlds. After my studies, I worked as a consultant for 12 years, but then I figured out that having good knowledge is very essential to actually being able to help practitioners. And now being an academic for the last 13 years, the academics say I'm not that academic as they wished me to be, but still I'm able to work with practitioners and to research those kind of topics that are relevant for practice. And that gives me a lot of energy, that gives me a lot of joy. And I think that's very necessary to build this bridge between academia and practice. So the recent, you can go to the next slide. Yeah. So this is more or less my position. So we do a lot of research and we try to dive into theories and concepts, but every time we try to bring it to practice, they want a very easy storyline, a very easy way of calculating things. And that's always the struggle, the challenge, but also the ambitions, at least I have as an academic. So looking at the recent global warming crisis, but also the COVID crisis, it's an extremely harsh situation for many, many people, for businesses, but also for governments and civil society. For me, it's also a very interesting period as things change for good, but things also change for worse. We see a very strong social movement uprising, focusing on local communities, focusing on being more and powerful, helping each other. So trying to reach out to your neighbors and the people which are close to you. But we see also struggle from firms trying to keep their feet dry. And by their struggle, they sometimes make decisions which are not that positive. So we see that people and organizations, they adapt to the situation, but often without thinking about the consequences of their acts. So there has been some research, and we see that very clearly in the Netherlands, that textile companies, they cancel orders or they don't pay for orders that have been placed already. And sometimes they don't even pay for orders that has been produced already. And you can imagine what that means for the people in the local communities and in the developing countries. So can we say that's quite logical because those textile companies, they're having a difficult time and they don't have the finance to pay the producers? Or should we say that it's not acceptable because you give the problems to the people who are already in an underprivileged situation? So there's a recent study from Oxfam Novib that recently came out, and they say that probably more people will die from hunger caused by the COVID crisis than from the disease itself. So isn't that an awful situation? And during the last year, we have done some research into the mission statements of firms, and we have found a very interesting development. So we see that mission statements has changed over the years. And when we look at the oldest mission statements, they already started the early 1900s. But I think there are more and more mission statements available from the 1950s up to the 1970s. And there the storyline was very strongly related to we will become the biggest, the best, we will be the best competitor, and we will destroy all our competitors. I always love this mission statement of Honda that was, we will destroy Yamaha. And that was the position that organizations took in the world. You can go to the next slide, or Johanna. And so there was a very, very strong focus on shareholder value. The period after that, so that was from the 1970s up to the 2000s, and still a lot of companies are in that situation. Companies were saying that, yes, of course, we want to make money, but it's not only about the money making. We want to do that by producing the best products that are out there. We want to provide the best services. So we saw a shift from purely focusing on finance towards high quality products and high quality services. In the next, so this was also the period where we saw a lot of total quality management systems coming up, all the ISO management systems that date from those from that period. The period after that, we saw another movement. So of course, companies still wanted to make money. They wanted to do that by producing high quality products or providing high quality services. But now they realize that it's all about the clients. So they don't produce the products for themselves. They want to please and make the clients more happy or more healthy or more resilient. So that was an interesting next period. And even more recently, and unfortunately not a lot of organizations are in that position yet, is that we see mission statements coming up that companies want to make money by producing good products, serving the client, but also having a positive impact on society. And if you could show the next slide, and we see some examples of the mission statements. So I've picked a few Dutch companies because I think we have a good front runners, a few good front runners. So for example, Philips made the statement that our goal is to improve the lives of 3 billion people every year by 2025. One of our large banks in the Netherlands, they say we want to achieve wealth and prosperity in the Netherlands, but also we want to resolve the food issue worldwide. And if we look at some mission statements from more socially oriented enterprises like Patagonia, they say we want to build the best products, cause no unnecessary harm, and use the business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. So we see often, yes, we have to make money or we want to make money with our products, serving the clients, but also do something good for society. And that's a very interesting period we're in now, because when you look at those kind of mission statements, it's not clear at all whether you look at a social enterprise, a real for-profit enterprise, a non-profit enterprise. So there's some kind of hybridization going on, which is shown on the next slide. And we see that not a lot of people, not a lot of organizations, they focus very strongly only on the social issues anymore. And there are also not a lot of companies that purely focus on the financial issues. And that is that financial oriented organizations, they realize that the social issues are very, very important to them. And social issues are also the environmental issues, so the more societal issues. On the other hand, we see that non-profit firms, they start investing in small and medium-sized enterprises in developing countries. And they move away from giving money away. So we see some kind of blurring situation now. But you can imagine that the way organizations handle this and the way they actually work and manage their systems to actually fulfill their mission are very, very differently. And that's very interesting for me. So we have done some research into the different approaches that companies actually use, and we have called them business models, but you can also call them approaches, more or less. So on the next slide, we see that one of the first business models that companies use is finance only. So we focus on finance. And finance has to grow. And there is only a very limited amount of things that we don't do. And that's the black or the blue dot in the middle. And that is everything that is not allowed by law or by regulation. So we do everything to earn as much money as we can. I always dare to say that in the Netherlands, but hopefully in Europe, we don't have those kind of organizations anymore. And I know that it's not completely true, but it is a situation where we have to move to. So a second business model is that it's still all about the money, but you see that the inner dot, it enlarged a little bit. And now the wording ESG is in the middle. And ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance policies. So those are firms that still want to make a lot of money, but not despite of everything. So they say, we know that it's not a very right thing, or we don't want to be involved in child labor or slavery issues or very high CO2 emissions. So there are several things that we don't accept by the way we earn our money. But what we see here is that ESG is a means to the end of making money. So it's a very do no harm perspective. So those kind of companies, they will not take a lot of effort to have a very good ESG policy available. They do as much as they have to do to make sure that it's all in line with their finance-only perspective. So that's the second model. And I think a lot of organizations, at least for-profit organizations, are in this business model. So if we look at the third business model, there we see something happening. So the end is not money only anymore, but there comes the impact. So those kind of firms, they want to have a positive impact on society, but also make money. And still there are some things they don't do because it doesn't fit in their ambitions. So no child labor, no water pollution, so not the too harmful things. You can imagine that for these companies, it's very hard to make a decision if there's a situation that, yes, it's good for finance, but not so good from an impact perspective, not so good for environmental or social issues. So what do you do? It might also be the other way around. So if it's very good for an environmental and social situation, but on the short term, it costs a little bit more. So those companies, they often struggle to set the boundaries. So when do you say no? And when can you accept it? So are you able, or are you capable, or are you willing to have a less focus on finance on the short term? So can you accept that your profit margin drops down on short-term basis, but your social impact is much higher? So how do you handle that? Because when it's a win-win, then it's easy, of course. And then probably also the companies who are in the first two business model would take that decision, because if it's a win for finance, it's always good. So the main struggle is when it's a win-lose situation, at least on the short term. In the fourth business model, we see that finance moves into the inner circle. So those are the typically social enterprises. So they have been started up to have this positive impact on society. And they use actually money to make that happen. So finance comes a means here and not an end in itself. So yes, we need finance, but only to be able to produce our products or to provide our services. And we see Patagonia as one of those companies, but also some very socially oriented banks, for example, in the Netherlands, like Triodos or ASM Bank. So they have a very strict focus on impact, and they use money as a mean to the end of having a lot of social impact. So finally, we have the fifth business model. And there are organizations who only focus on impact. Money doesn't play a role that much. And those are typically non-profit organizations. And it doesn't mean that they don't need any finance, but producing finance or having a profit is not in their ambition and nor in their vision. So it's really impact focus. That's the main target. What we see happening is that firms, they shift from one business model to another business model. So we have seen in the last 10, 15 years, a lot of large multinational for-profit companies shifting away from the first business model that purely focused on finance towards a more do no harm perspective and even towards a do good approach. What we've also seen happening is that non-profits who started in business model 5, so a pure focus on impact, they move from the impact focus towards business model 4. So they don't give money away anymore, but they start investing money in SMEs in developing countries. And the social enterprises, we also see sometimes shifting from an impact focus to a money and impact focus, especially when external investors come in. And you can imagine that if you move your vision and if you move your ambition from finance only to finance plus impact, everything has to change along with your shift. So also the management, accounting and control system. So what kind of data do you actually need to make decisions? And I think we're in the middle of this struggle. So how to combine financial and non-financial information? How to value non-financial information if we don't know what the effect will be on the firm and in the end on the financial position of a firm. What we also see companies struggling with is how to actually include this in their corporate governance system. So many challenges that those kind of organizations struggle with. And if you click one time further, we see 6 challenges that organizations struggle with. So shifting the model means that you have to find a new alignment between words and action. So we see a lot of organizations that have changed their wording, so the mission statement changed. But if you really look very strictly to what they do and the way they handle it, the way they have internalized it, there's not a strong story there. So we internally, not a lot of things actually have changed. And that becomes much more a problem, because when investors put their money in your organization because you have this beautiful storyline that you're going to do something good for the world, you have to keep in mind that those kind of investors want to have some kind of data on it. And it doesn't mean that it has to be monetized or not even always quantified, but the storyline should be very, very clear. So the alignment between words and action is very important. If you really want to have this double focus on money and impact, or using money to have an impact, you have to keep in mind that you always have to enlarge your time perspective from short-term to long-term. Because on a short-term basis, it will always be very hard. It will always be good for one dimension, but not so good for other dimensions. And if it is a win-win, of course, everyone will do that. So we don't need socially oriented organizations to pick up those kind of issues. If it's a short-term financial win, also the for-profits will dive into it, because that's what they do. They look for options to make a lot of money. So integrated value measurement, that's what we really need. And I know that we will have a lot of discussions later this afternoon, but also in the morning sessions related to integrated value measurement, and how to include that in your management, accounting and control systems. So there's a lot of discussion going on whether, for example, ESG targets should be part of remuneration. And what we know from target setting is that it often counterparts the intrinsic motivation. So it's although it seems very logical to include it in your target setting, you really have to think about whether you're not taking up perverse targets, because what people tend to do is to tick the box and to make sure they stick to their targets. So you have to really think what kind of targets you need to fulfill your ambition. And that's all part of the management accounting and control systems. And finally, from output to impact. So what we see happening is that a lot of organizations, they are very capable of telling and saying and explaining what they have done. So we have trained many employees, we have had a lot of stakeholder meetings, we have spoken to everyone, we have taken specific items into account when we made a decision. So the storylines are out there, and the output data is often also available. But what is not that clear is what the impact is of those kind of outputs. So what does it mean? If you really have trained your employees to be able to translate the ESG policies to their daily practices, and you have trained all those employees, what is the effect of it? Do we see something changing? Do we see better approaches? Do we see less difficult situations related to fraud or too high emissions or those kind of things? So what is the impact of the things organizations do? And I think this is also a trend where we're in the middle, where we are in the middle of. So there are more and more metrics available, but still, how to argue that a company is investing private money to have a public value, and if you're not capable of explaining how this public value bounces back to your organization or what it means for your financial position, you will always have a hard time. So those are 6 challenges that we as academics are working on, and I think are very interesting from practitioners. And also those are 6 challenges that practitioners are really challenged with and are looking for answers. So hopefully during the rest of the day, we will have a lot of discussions related to those topics, but also a lot of opportunities to work together, or even a lot of solutions that we can provide to each other. So either the practitioners to the academics or the academics to the practitioners. So that's all I wanted to say. I'm hoping that the morning sessions and also the afternoon sessions will provide us a lot of opportunity to have a great discussion over those 6 challenges. And last of all, I would like to say enjoy the conference. And thank you, the World Business team, for having this all organized. So Katja, Johanna, and Rodney, and the rest of the team, it will be much fun. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Karen. We actually have a question for you, so you can't go too far away just yet. So we have a question in the chat function from Frederick Barge from Reward Value Organization, and I'll just read it out to you. So moving to the 3rd and 4th business models is also dependent on the attitude of the investment community in allowing a more long-term orientation. For this to happen, long-term orientation needs to be more embedded in the investment value chain on the one hand, and in executive remuneration on the other hand. What is your view?
Yeah, of course, you're completely right. So I've just came out of a course. So we are also organizing courses on sustainable finance. So yesterday and the day before, I was together with a group of 24 institutional investors, but also people from banks, discussing this topic. And the main problem is that, of course, the organizations, they want to have this long-term perspective and they're willing to enlarge the time frame. But the individual investors, often their target setting is based on short-term performance. And that's very problematic. And I do see a shift from short-term to long-term. But also investors still find it very hard because they have their fiduciary rights. They have to work into the best way for their clients. But at least the discussions pop up. We have some good examples available. And I think in the next 10 years, we will have this huge shift from short-term to long-term. But we also have to keep in mind that not everyone is willing to give up the short-term goal-catching perspective. But a lot of us do.
And we're starting to see the chat function heat up here. So this is what we want. So Dr. Sonia Stuchty, sorry if I've got that wrong. Question is, shouldn't output dimensions be judged from the outside of a company?
But what do you mean with that? Shouldn't output dimension be judged from the outside of a company? So you mean that the stakeholders say whether the performance is good enough? And if that's the question, yes, of course it is. Or is the question more that the output indicators should be decided by the outside community?
Your assumption is correct, Karen. So okay. Dr. Sonia says yes.
Yes, of course it is. But still, output in itself is not always very informative about the impact of the firm on society. So the output is more saying what the firm has done, while the impact should say something about the results of the things that firms have done. And of course, we see a lot of output information, but it's not always very informative because it says something, looking back, I've done this, but it doesn't say something about future outlook. Okay, what does it mean? What do I still have to do? And where are my challenges and struggles for the coming 20 years? Great.
And thanks, Ralph, for your intervention there and the uploading of a new blueprint that the Reporting 3.0 organization has recently launched on sustainable finance. So again, there's a resource that's been just uploaded into the chat. So I strongly encourage you to keep this conversation going. I don't want today to be a show and tell. Sometimes Zoom makes that happen. But keep the conversation going, connect with each other, and so if you have questions, please answer them. But today we were unable to secure Peter Bakker to do an in-person presentation to you. And for that, he does apologize. He's exceptionally busy at the moment, as you can imagine. But what we've managed to do is get Peter, who's the president and CEO of WBCSD, to record his own video, which he did on his own in his house in Switzerland. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Joanna to play Peter's welcome.
Good day. My name is Peter Bakker, and I'm the president and CEO of WBCSD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. There's no question that COVID-19 has tried and tested our systems, shown the vulnerabilities and unpreparedness, economically, socially, when it comes to our relationship with nature. As was the case for this pandemic, we are very ill prepared for the other shocks to our systems that science are warning us for, like climate change and biodiversity loss. How we react to these will define how we thrive or survive. This is why we need to flip the script. We need to address the deep systemic vulnerabilities the pandemic has exposed. We need to transform our systems to be more prosperous and equal. The good news is that COVID-19 has shown us that significant change is possible. We have a very rare opportunity to shape a more sustainable and resilient world. These next months will determine how we give meaning to building forward better. A crucial part of this is how we integrate sustainability into capitalism. For businesses, building forward better is about much more than corporate social responsibility. It is about truly engaging markets with the natural, social, and economic capital on which they depend. It is about building real resilience, driving equitable and sustainable growth, and making stakeholder capitalism real and rewarding. Financial systems need to understand and value companies' societal and environmental contributions and impacts. The cost of capital is to be defined by both ESG and financial risks and performance. This is why WBCSD just announced a new collaboration with the Principles for Responsible Investment, or PRI. We have joined forces to create the enabling conditions for a sustainable finance system. As the backbone for this, we need two crucial things: better risk management and better data on all three ESG issues. Firstly, to stay competitive, business will need to take a closer look at the risk management and ensure that they have integrated ESG aspects across their whole value chain. ESG information is crucial for all companies to be better prepared, build resilience, and ensure long-term value creation. Which brings me to the second point, better data. This is crucial since both business and capital markets need to better and more comparable information on ESG to be able to make the right and sustainable decisions. COVID-19 has especially shined a spotlight on the S in ESG, the social aspects. We don't have as mature measuring techniques as we do for environmental aspects, for which we have science-based targets, for example. We need to organize ourselves quickly around universal social metrics, including living wage and human rights across the value chain, to ensure the quality of data for social issues. And we need to ensure that businesses have the proper tools and guidance to implement this fast. The people in this room can help. To improve the data for all the ESG aspects, material data needs to be decision useful, meaning it needs to be assured and comparable. In this context, I'm happy to see that the reporting frameworks are moving towards a globally harmonized system for ESG disclosures. Once the ESG data is available, we need to ensure that all material risks and opportunities are considered in corporate strategy and internal decision making. If we don't seize this opportunity to build forward better, to reset and reinvent rather than return to normal, systemic risk and vulnerabilities will continue to accumulate, making future shocks both more likely and more dangerous. I therefore call upon all of you, with your expertise, your knowledge, to contribute with your valuable research to work closely on these aspects that need change. Practitioners and researchers need to come together, collaborate on solutions to show business true value and contributions to society. Thank you.
And thanks also to Peter for taking the time out of his busy agenda to make that video. And it emphasizes the importance at WBCSD of academia and practitioner collaboration. Peter draws on two things that he's highlighted. One is better risk management. I'm curious as to what the group will think of risk management, because we're going to have a session on it later today. WBCSD and COSO developed the guidance on how to embed ESG-related risks into enterprise risk management. But let's look at the sobering facts. COVID-19 is the fourth respiratory illness in 18 years, and it's the second global pandemic in 11 years. But when we at the WBCSD did some research, we found that only 8 organizations out of 400 actually identified a health pandemic as a potential risk that they disclosed in their external filings. And the question is, why is that happening? Why when we've had 4 respiratory illnesses, why when we know that SARS and H1N1 and COVID-1 and COVID-2 were in the atmosphere, we're circulating, did business not address this, or not identify it or prioritize it? And today we're going to explore what are the changes we need to make to maybe move away from risk management into vulnerability management. How do we assess business's vulnerability? Because at the end of the day, as human beings, we're all subject to bias. And I don't know about you, but when someone asks you, how likely is that to happen? Many people will say, not on my watch. Now that's bravado. That's not based on fact. Secondly, he's talked about data. And question maybe for you, Karen, on your presentation, you talked about the different business models and the way in which finance was maybe outside, ESG was sort of, not really embedded. Are you seeing, and maybe also to all the academics, are you seeing the investment needed within business to improve the data quality, capture and consolidation such that investor-grade ESG information is being used internally and externally? Or is finance still somewhere on the journey towards realization that this is part of their responsibility? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, what we see happening is that the investors, with a few exceptions, of course, they don't ask that request for ESG information. And if they do, it's of course through rating agencies, but then every rating agency asks for something different. There's not a lot of comparison. It's not very obvious why they ask for specific information. And from my perspective, the main problem with rating agencies and the things that ESG information is now used in by investors is that it's very much focused on process information or management information. So they ask, do you have a policy on child labor prevention? And for companies, it's not that hard to come up with policies and documents where they state what they are going to do. To have a check on the actual performance and on the impact, that's much harder. And I think most of these sustainability rating agencies, they want to move towards more performance and impact-based measurements, but it's very hard for them to do because this is also often not information that the companies themselves can provide. So you should really move to the producers or clients or whatever to look at the impact of the things they do. And that's one of the most problematic things.
Great, thank you. Well, without further ado, I see the chat is starting to hot up even more, so keep it going. And I'll now hand over to Katja, who will direct us into our breakout sessions for this morning.
So now we're moving on to the morning breakout session, and we're going to have two great aspects looking at valuation and reporting in the era of uncertainty. And then we'll also have looking ahead with COVID-19 and preparing for systemic risks through TCFD. And this has really also a lens about resilience. So you have already been allocated to the two sessions. And if there's any issues, you can leave the room, come to the main plenary, and I can allocate again if anything comes up. So when the sessions are starting to end, each group will be notified that the time is coming to come together once again into the plenary session. And as for the morning session, same house rules apply. So do put questions in the chat with the moderators, and the speakers are happy to answer these. So without further ado, see you guys in the breakout rooms.
To use it. And Delphine, that was very interesting that she is also working on the valuation, but also integrating that in MBA, because having it included in education is at least the first step we need to take, because everyone should be much more aware of the cost related to externalities. In the second session, we focused on materiality, and we discussed the materiality process, the different perspectives, different definitions. Very interesting indeed. And what it seems to the group is that materiality is often used for reporting, and that's more, and if you link your materiality assessment to that, it's more to have support for the question, am I doing the things right? So it's more checking up whether you're reporting on the right issues, whether you're doing right. While you could also use materiality more upfront from a strategic perspective, and then you would change to the question, am I doing the right things? Which is actually much more interesting. But then the questions rose from material for whom and from which perspective, from a business perspective or from a societal perspective. And that's really intertwined, but in reality, companies seem to pick one specific perspective and don't use it very strategically yet. And we had a very nice example of Inel, of Julia, how she is actually using it. And Yilde explained the research she's doing together with the World Business Council on drafting the scene. So what are companies actually doing now, and what would be the best step forward? So how could we actually improve it? And that will hopefully, together with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, end up in some kind of guidelines for companies to improve the whole process around materiality. So that was a short wrap-up of what we have been discussing.
Thank you, Karen. Very interesting. And now I would turn to Igor
So you had in your session, you had Lyndon Edgell talk about really resilience, the big picture and the vision going forward. And you also then touched upon with Lois Guthrie and Richard Barker on a business practitioner kind of side and also academic side on how TCFD and systemic risk plays out. Could you give an overview of your key insights from your session? Just double check that you're not muted. It seems that we're having a bit of issues with technical issues for key insights from the second session. Do we have...
Otherwise, could perhaps one of the presenters give a short
Yes, exactly.
resume?
So if Rodney is on the line, no, he's not, unfortunately.
Hi, Johanna. I mean, I can try to help. I'm afraid I didn't quite prepare for this, but as I think you all know, we heard from Lyndon on the work that WBCSD has been doing to update its Vision 2050, in particular on resilience. And Lyndon was able to give us some ways of understanding the meaning of resilience and how it can be applied by business. And so that she presented the work that's in progress at WBCSD on our Vision 2050. And then in the session that Professor Richard Barker and I participated in, we were discussing the learnings from the pandemic about the nature of risk and climate risk in particular, and the implications for accounting. And I don't think any of you will be surprised on the accounting side that, you know, the high level conclusion is, you know, the standards need to develop quickly in response to the to climate change risks. And on the TCFD side, there's a lot of scope for development of the rules and testing how they are applied and translated into action so that we can see how the risks are responded to. But that we had quite a long list of things that we thought that the academics could do. So I'm sure there'll be a way of sharing this through the network, and I'm sure that will be made available to you. So sorry for a rather short summary.
No, that's great, Lois. Thank you very much. Now, so after the morning wrap up, we've discussed throughout all of these topics, we see that the challenges and opportunities linked to it are influenced and really need all kind of stakeholder voices, so practitioners and academics. So one key part of all of this is also collaboration. So I wanted to just bring out three kind of aspects to it. So I example a call now, an example, and then possibly call for anything else that especially have come out during these discussions, during the sessions. So the first one is on ESG reporting landscape. We have the Reporting Exchange platform, which many of you are probably familiar with, but it's a free database of over 2,000 reporting provisions covering over 70 countries. And this was made in collaboration with CDSB, EcoDesk, and also funding from the Moore Foundation. And of course, it's a huge collaborative effort. So we've had our global network and research partners also help out. So if you're interested, we're currently doing our annual data review. So just double checking that the data online is up to date, because this platform really helps to understand what, where, and how to report on ESG information. And so if you want to enhance your knowledge in this area and you think you can contribute, please do be in touch with me. I can give you some more details. The other one is what Karen also mentioned from what came out in their session, is that WBCSD is currently also collaborating with the Erasmus School of Economics around materiality research. And I just wanted to bring it up again as an example of these kind of projects, and also that the guidance and academic research will probably be out, are planned to be out in Q1 2021, so next year. And then based on all these conversations that have been, what else is possible? What kind of collaborations between academics, practitioners, and anybody during this conference? If you have any ideas, do pop them in the chat. I mean, it's great to start that brainstorming around these. So then, right before we break to lunch, I'll just give a short overview about the afternoon breakout sessions. So they will go from 1 to 4 p.m. CST. We have 3. So the first one I'll talk about, so the Enhancing Resilience Risk Workshop, where they're going to dive into the business case and how to integrate ESG-related risks into mainstream risk processes. So we have a great line of speakers. We have experts from WBCSD, so Gordon Darlin, Eleanor Leach, and Rodney Irvin. We also have a great external speakers. So we have Tori Yoshida and Nancy Mansilla, who will bring their views also into this through case studies and others. Then we have business training on natural capital, where Katja Bonga will be leading this session with inputs from Richard Spencer and also 2 business case studies. So we have Navigator Company, Paulo Guimares, and also Cementos Argos, Maria Luisa Villa, that will provide insights and what have the opportunities and challenges that they have in integrating and the business case for natural capital within business. Then the third one is strengthening ESG disclosure, where we'll have Rodney Irvin. He's clearly a man of many talents. And then we'll also have Mario Abella, myself, and Sustainalyze's Anik and Lot, who will provide insights into materiality and how it's important to link also into companies' risks and strategies that was already touched upon the morning breakout session. Rodney will give an oversight of the current ESG reporting landscape, and especially also diving into some of the developments that have been related to now with COVID. Then we have Mario Abella, who will go through assurance and how to strengthen the ESG data. So we did write that we might go a little bit into TCFD in the descriptions. This time we won't have, unfortunately, time for that in this session, especially because it was touched upon in the morning breakout session as well. So to connect, you have the 3 links here for each session. We'll also pop these into the chat. So please join them at 1 p.m. CEST. And then after that, we'll come all back at 4:15 p.m. We'll come back all to this link that was used in the morning plenary to go throughout the rest of the day. Bon appetit, everyone, and see you soon at 3. If there's any questions, we'll keep this line open and happy to answer them. Bon appetit. Yes.
I just want to remind people that after these sessions, coming back to plenary is extremely important, because I think sometimes at these events we don't self-reflect as much as we should. And so we have a really exciting session starting at 4:30 on individual resilience. And given the year that we've had, give yourself over to some selfish pleasure this afternoon and come back and enjoy the session with Sue. So bon appetit, as Joanna has already said, and we'll see you all back in plenary at later on this afternoon. Thank you. Well, everybody, welcome back. I hope you find the 3 breakout sessions informative, that you've maybe found something that you can bring back to either your workplace or to your teaching or to your research. I'm conscious that not everybody is back in the room. So what we would like to do now is get feedback from the 3 groups that were off-site or in separate breakout sessions. I don't see my colleagues from Enhancing Resilience. online just yet, so they're probably still making their coffee. But so can I therefore ask Katja if you could provide some insights, share what went on in the business training on natural capital. And if I could ask you to do so in about 5 minutes, that would be great.
Hi, Ronnie. Yeah, sure, of course, and probably will try and be even quicker than that. So in our session, we went through the business training on natural capital as part of the We Value Nature campaign. For those that aren't so familiar with We Value Nature campaign, it's a 3-year project which aims to support businesses and the natural capital community in increasing uptake of natural capital approaches. And so during that training, we essentially went through an introduction to natural capital. So we focused on natural capital. We tried to understand what is natural capital, why it's important in terms of business decision-making and risk management. And we also had a quick overview of some of the key approaches that businesses can adopt. And so essentially, I'd say that the key learnings from the session is that every business impacts and depends on nature, directly or indirectly. We had a lot of discussions about how you can apply a natural capital approach and how that's important in making better informed decisions. And we went through the natural capital protocol as a helpful framework to identify and assess your impacts and dependencies on natural capital. We also discussed about how understanding, measuring, and valuing natural capital will help make better decisions and informed decisions as well, while mitigating your risks. And we also talked about how monetary valuation is one way of doing things, but not only. And we had a chance to hear from Paula, representing the Navigator company, pulp and paper company in Portugal, who gave us a very concrete and practical example on how she's adopted the natural capital protocol and more specifically the forest sector guide in their conservation strategy and biodiversity strategy as well. So that was really helpful in actually understanding how a business has applied the natural capital protocol. And we then had a chance to hear from Maria from Cementos Argos, a cement company based in Colombia, who's shared their value added statement. It's a very different example where concretely they've measured and valued in monetary terms their impacts, not only on natural capital, but also economically speaking and on social and human aspects. So we had a really interesting discussion there with Maria as well on what the challenges are in doing such a type of assessment, but also the benefits. And one of them being, which was discussed this morning as well during the session with Christian and Delphine, that it's a language that can speak to a lot of people, among other things. So that's essentially sort of the discussions we had, and yeah, hopefully it was a rich session for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Katja. Can I next go to Gordon? Maybe in 5 minutes, just give us an overview of the Enhancing Resilience session and some key takeaways, please.
Oh, hi there, guys. Thanks, Rodney. So the Enhancing Resilience session, it comprised a review of the business case for ESG, incorporation of enterprise risk management techniques applied to ESG, and so looking at kind of the changing global landscape, considerations of investors, customers, employees, and regulators and communities and NGOs. And then also considerations about how prepared organisations were based upon kind of existing approaches to risk management and crisis management for the pandemic, and some of the learnings from that. We discussed our guidance for the application of enterprise risk management to ESG related risks, which we co-developed with COSO. And we provided an overview of the 5 chapters of that guidance, which cover good practice and processes and capabilities, guidance around governance and culture, strategy and objective setting, risk management, so in relation to identification, assessment, prioritization, and response to risks. And then also the guidance covers monitoring and the reporting and disclosure of risk performance. So following that day, we then had played a risk game, a kind of a Zoom-based version of our risk game, which was really good, which Rodney facilitated, and I think that was interesting in a number of levels, both in terms of the engagement and kind of focus of those who were playing the game, but also in a couple of points that came up about how connected and easy it was to interact, not specifically for the game, but from a general point around Zoom and the impacts of Zoom and how well we have conversations and voices being heard. And so when we're thinking about how we felt playing the game, there were some really kind of interesting personal dynamics that came out from that as well. And then Tori from the Nomura Research Institute and Nancy from the ISOS group, they presented case studies ranging from Google and Salesforce down to WD-40, and they were looking at the risk assessment and identification strategy and objective setting and critical considerations for these organisations as they built their capabilities and specific products, and looked at the value both from financially and business performance, but also societally and across different capitals. And then finally, we talked about the criticality of looking at the connectivity and dynamics of risk networks and moving beyond impact and likelihood approaches to address the kind of characteristics and complexity and multifaceted aspects of ESG related risks. So I think there were some really interesting points came out. Actually, a couple of them needs for continued focus on board education and judicious decision making. I think being heard in a good Zoom world, but also having good conversations and keeping an open door to voices in order to get that diversity and breadth of view. And then finally, as I said, critically building resilience through understanding connections of risks. So, you're on mute, Rodney.
That is probably the most common phrase this year, you're on mute. Joanna, you are going to provide us with feedback on the strengthening disclosure session, so over to you.
Yes, thank you, Rodney. So during our strengthening disclosure session, we started by discussing the current landscape in ESG disclosure and some of the hot topics coming out of the press. So we just had last week, you might have seen, so the usual suspects in ESG reporting. So we have our GRIs, CDPs, SASBs, and the gang who announced a joint statement to work together towards harmonization this landscape, which is quite exciting. Also next week, a heads up, so we have the World Economic Forum and IBC that are doing their updates on their metrics, core metrics on ESG. And then there's also, of course, the task force on nature-related financial disclosures that is vamping up, that I'm sure that we're going to be continuing to see in the news on these. After that, we dove into a bit of how companies can essentially take back control of their reporting and disclosure by taking a step back and strategically thinking about their reporting process and applying judgment to it step by step. Then we had Sustainalyze go over how has COVID actually affected the current materiality assessment for companies, and also diving into the link between materiality, risk management, and strategy as well, and how can that help kind of understand better and manage better companies' value creation beyond only financial information. So of course, diving into the risk and opportunity side with material topics. And then we had Mario Abella from WBCSD, experts in assurance, internal controls and governance, who went through essentially how can the data, ESG data, be trusted, and how can companies robust their ESG data through, for example, assurance, and what the role of assurance is. So that was our session for the last 3 hours. Thank you, Rodney.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And you know, this conference, as well as the one we did 5 years ago, tries to bring together, as I said at the beginning, academics and practitioners. And just want to do a shout out to Mario. I don't think he's online anymore, but he's finalizing his PhD. So send him best wishes virtually. He's right down to finalizing his last chapter. And I think for many of you, you'll know exactly what that means. Mario is not 20-something anymore, so I want to send him all the best of luck to balancing this with a busy career. And you know, on the call today, we've had Gordon, who's also in his own right an academic, having completed his PhD in mathematics. Little did he know when he was finishing that he would be encouraging people to be more sustainable using dynamic risk assessments as a vehicle for doing so. But enough of business talk, enough of us talking about how to make the world better. What we need to do is take care of ourselves as much as take care of the world around us. And this notion of resilience has been around for a long time. And when we talk about resilience, as I said, a lot of the literature is in psychology and psychiatry around making an individual resilient to the stresses that they may come across in their world. But I wanted to remind us all of Hans Karl von Karlowitz's infamous quote from 1713, which is probably the start of our formal writings on sustainability, when he said, "We must aim for a continuous, resilient and sustainable use of forests." So this term resilience has been around in sustainability for a long time. But what I've observed, and this is where I'm going to be a bit more vulnerable and talk a little bit about this year, is that this year has not been easy. And anybody that says 2020 has been one of their favorites probably needs further explanation of what's been going on. I've found being at home on my own sometimes quite challenging. I found the workload that I've been confronted with much, much heavier and much greater than the normal workload that I have, and trust me, that was never light. And I found that the blurring of home and work life is now such that I fall out of bed into an office. So I don't have that connection of even being grounded by somebody on a tube or on a bus. You know, may not be the pleasant of social interactions, but at least there's human beings around. So what I've observed in the past years, or the past 6 months, more than ever, is a need to take care of myself. And so today I wouldn't want today to focus on resilience without us having a period of self-discovery, period of self-reflection, and a period of renewing our commitments to taking care of ourselves, because we need to be fighting fit if we're going to take on the challenges that the world needs to be addressed. And so it's without further ado and with great pleasure that I would like to introduce you to Sue Farmer. So Sue is the founder and CEO of a company based in the UK called Opportuniality. And opportunity is a word that Sue has brought to our lexicon. And at WBCSD, within a few weeks of lockdown, we implemented emotional and psychological support for staff. And Sue, together with a Swiss-based psychiatrist, co-delivered very vital sessions for WBCSD staff on a Monday and a Thursday. And many of our staff found them to be exceptionally helpful. I obviously can't offer you that for a number of weeks, but what I can do is give you a time to listen to what Sue has to say, to maybe get you to think a little bit different about your own practices, and to remember that resilience isn't just about business, it's about ourselves. So over to you. So you're on mute, there we go.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to tell me. All my buttons moved around just to see if I was paying enough attention. Thank you so much for the introduction, Rodney. And thank you also for causing us to think for a moment that, you know, it's tough in isolation. Let's not kid ourselves. This home working stuff, you know, it's got its benefits. But as with everything in life, it's also got its disbenefits. And we need to remember that. So when we start to think about how we are with us, we need to learn to be a little bit kinder to us. And where does personal resilience fit into all of the sustainability work that I've heard about today? Well, like most things, I think everything starts with human sustainability. If we can't create our own sustainability, then how on earth can we take that message out into the wider world? And even before COVID came along, I was in high demand to help people understand what was going on in terms of stress and a lack of balance and time. And one of the things that I'd like to share with you is that stress is very normal. It's something that we all encounter from time to time, but how it impacts us and how long it impacts us for is between us and us. We drive that. It's just that we may not be aware of how we drive it. Now let's understand that the operating system that runs inside our body is vastly outdated. We weren't designed to live in the world that we live in today. You know, I heard someone earlier talking about flight, fight and freeze. And to our instincts in our brains and the way our bodies respond, we're still thinking about tigers in the jungle. Now, we may think of some of our bosses as behaving like tigers in the jungle, however, they don't impact us physically in the way we used to be impacted. And yet our response is still the same. And if we're going to build resilience, then we need to get to know us. And we need to get to know us in a way that we probably have never even believed that we could do that. Because if we don't know us, then we won't know when we're reacting in a less balanced or a more stressed way. And the minute the stress comes on, as you'll see as we go through this process, well, actually we're no longer in control. So as we recognise that we're in chaos, COVID-19 has just added to life's chaos and its complexity and its challenge. Let's start instantly by building some balance. So all I'd like to ask you to do, it's been a long day, is just to get comfortable in your seat. Put all of your attention in the area of your heart and just breathe a little slower, a little deeper than you would normally. Now, sometimes when I ask people to do this, I get a bit of resistance. This stuff, it's not for me. I don't really need it. I've got my own ways of coping. Except as we go through this presentation today, you'll see that building an inner balance is a bit like having vitamin C. It is for you, and if you don't have it, the impact is huge from a health perspective, never mind a business performance perspective. So please, play with me just for a while. Put the focus on your heart and take your breath a little slower. And because most of us been sat down all day in front of our computers, we probably haven't been breathing too well. So as we breathe, I'd like to ask you to send your breath all the way down into the bottom of your lungs so that you stretch out your diaphragm. Lazy breathing is a real common problem in today's world. Now, it doesn't kill us, not instantly anyway, but it does slow the amount of oxygen into the brain. Just spend a minute focusing on your heart, slowing your breath. If possible, try and get the inhale to balance with the exhale. And just try and keep your focus and your attention in the area of your heart and in the area of your breath as I continue taking you on a journey about you. Now, why did I do that before I introduce myself? Because a busy mind has busy ears that don't hear very well. And actually, I care passionately about human sustainability. So I really want you to hear. So you can see I work in a variety of ways, and by the way, my background was as an IT consultant before I became a business change consultant, running a number of turnaround projects and businesses to get them back on their feet. And all through that, I observed how important people were and how understanding us and getting to really know us is the key to our sustainability, our longevity, our ability to get things done in the world. So who am I? I'm someone who spends their life helping individuals, teams, and organisations be at their very best. And who are you? Rodney earlier was talking about self-care and self-discovery, something that he's put some focus on in his introduction this morning. Well, who are you? When have you spent time thinking about who you are? If we don't know who we are, when we get caught up in life's illusions, and the picture that I'm showing here is of a wildebeest on the salt pan in Etosha in Namibia. And in the distance, you may see that little dark blob that looks a bit like a kind of rain cloud. And you may be wondering, what on earth is a rain cloud doing over a desert salt pan? Let me tell you, that's a mirage, an illusion, something that a camera can pick up, but actually in real life doesn't exist. Now, if we can photograph illusions and share them with each other, just imagine how that works in the workplace, in the home life. We need to bust these illusions and really get on top of who we are, how we work, and what do I need to be aware of so that I can really build resilience. And that's exactly what we're going to run through this afternoon. Understanding stress, really understanding it. It's not a dirty word. It is something that we all suffer from time to time. How does it impact me? How do I know I'm being at the receiving end? How do I create balance? And how do I re-energize? And then ultimately, how do I build resilience? All of which we're going to cover this afternoon. Now let's go back to some biology before we start. Let's go back to school just for a moment. We have these 6 systems in our body that make up the 37 trillion cells, give or take 1 or 2, that are us as we sit here today. Now, all of those systems and all 37 trillion cells are linked. You cannot impact one part of a system without having a reverberation across the whole 37 trillion cells. And the challenge for us humans is that when we have a response to something, let's say we get a cold, we think we've just got a cold. But in reality, the cold is masking what is going on in the rest of the body. And the rest of the systems were showing signs of dis-ease, think about our language, way before the cold came to manifest itself. And so therefore, how do we get to notice that actually something's a bit off kilter? How do we get so up close and personal with ourselves? Well, if we're going to do that, we then also need to understand what stress is. Let's blow the myth of stress. Well, stress is tension, and it could be physical. So I could have a strained muscle, or indeed, as I suffered unfortunately recently, a broken bone. That's a stress response. Could be mental, or it could be emotional. Quite often, it's associated with negative feelings or emotions. And it certainly is something that we experience when we sense the expectations, either realistically or otherwise, are more than we can meet. Stress will trigger to one degree or another the flight, fight or freeze response. And what that means internally is we're in a state of allostasis. We're imbalanced. Things are not working as they should. We are designed to be in the zone, working at our best all of the time. That's how the system has been designed. When we're out of balance, we stop that from happening, and then we start to limit the capability of the system. So what should I be looking for? How do I know if I'm stressed? If I'm not that up and close and personal with me, how do I know if I'm stressed? Well, I start to lose some mental clarity. I start to feel a bit isolated. And boy, have we come across this one during our home working experiences. I find rest, ending my day, a little bit tougher. Perhaps I struggle to relax. And I sit down and then I think of all the things I could be doing, should be doing. And I get up and move again. And sleep, maybe it takes me a long time to go off to sleep. Or maybe I go off just fine and then I wake up in the middle of the night and I start to think. Sometimes I question, am I good enough? Can I do this still? Or maybe I find it hard to motivate myself, never mind the rest of my team, to hit that very challenging deadline. Maybe I lose my ability to be objective and opinions about things that a couple of weeks ago I would have just let ride. Or maybe I'm overly empathetic and feeling very tearful, very sad. Goodness knows there's been enough negative news on the telly. Or maybe I've lost my ability to empathise and I find myself becoming ever more judgmental or critical. Not only with my work colleagues, but also with friends and family. Maybe I don't want to answer the phone because they just annoy me. Or maybe I don't want to respond to that friendly email anymore. And if I don't notice this, well, then it doesn't just go away. It often just builds, but it doesn't build in a big bang. It builds slowly. So it kind of creeps up on us. It kind of hijacks us. And when we get to the point of tired is our new norm. We're tired all week. We're absolutely exhausted by the time it comes to Friday, end of the week. And then lo and behold, Monday starts and by lunchtime we're tired again. We need to take some notice of this. Where we're pushing continuously on the edge of energy that we really don't have anymore. Where we're starting to blame others or ourselves for just about everything. Where our decision making doesn't quite seem to be as clear as it was before, or we've got this underlying sense of anxiety and a need to control absolutely everything down to the finest detail. Small incidences become huge dramas, and we start to experience some physical stress symptoms. And they are wide and very personal. Maybe I'm suffering from some lower back pain, which is a classic stress symptom. Maybe my neck hurts or my shoulders feel like they're always up. And when we start to think about body language, just think about what are those shoulders protecting? That very vulnerable neck area. But as I say, it doesn't just happen, and it certainly doesn't come waving a flag. It builds up slowly. So slowly, in fact, that we rarely notice it unless somebody points it out to us. And when we get to that point of having a complete imbalance in our energy, well, that's when stupid things happen. And we can all recall people doing stupid things in the workplace, some of which don't have horrific outputs. Others have unbelievably impactful outputs. Some of them life-threatening. So we know that super smart people make bad decisions that end up in stupid actions when they're stressed. So what we need to do is learn to turn that situation around, build up a bank of energy, get some resilience going, so that we permanently live in a more eased sense rather than worrying about dis-ease continuously. And I use the words very deliberately because the language is there to highlight these things for us. Now, I'd like to give you an example, technology allowing, of exactly how it can just creep up on us. Now, I'm going to show you a very short video. I'm going to stop it in the middle I want you to have a quick check-in with yourself when we stop in the middle and just notice, how are you feeling? What's going on the inside of you? Just before we start, do that very thing for me, please. Just have a look inside yourself. And we can all do this. Have a look inside yourself and just take a very quick note of how you're feeling now. Are you tired? Are you happy? Are you relaxed? Are you comfortable? Are you wondering what's going to happen? Are you thinking, how long have we got to go? Because it's been a long day. And as you take note of exactly how you're feeling, let me launch my little video. So once again, just take note of how you're feeling. Quick check in with yourself. What's going on the inside? What has changed in that last 30 seconds from where you were when I last asked that question? And just keep a note as we continue to watch. That just sound can have such a big impact on us. Now, I'm sure you noticed that we had the same image playing twice as a film show, and yet the sound in the background shifted from that very scratchy, noisy tune to something that was far more melodic. And the reason that I use that video to demonstrate just how things can impact us is very often we're working in environments where we're only half listening. And the soundtrack that happens in the background can be gently, or perhaps not so gently, chipping away at our resilience levels and our stress levels. As I said, it doesn't come with a huge flag. It gently creeps up on us. But the great news is that when we're aware of it, we can do something about it. So when we're talking about resilience, and there's been lots of definitions of the word resilience today, and I'm going to go along with the ones that have already been presented to you. For me, resilience is about the capacity to prepare for, so that I've got some energy in the bank, recover from, and adapt in the moment in the face of stress, challenge, or adversity. Now, it's all very well me feeling resilient and calm and comfortable when I'm at home and perhaps sat listening to some peaceful music or with a candle on and watching the candle flicker. What about when I'm in a meeting? What about when things have just unravelled on a Zoom call? That's when I need my resilience. That's when I need the ability in the moment to be able to adapt. So what we're talking about today is an understanding where we can build our resilience capacity, sustain our energy, and utilise it in the moments when we need it most, not when we're trying to control ourselves after a tough day at work. Now, in order to get to that point, we need to start really building up some self-awareness, some really deep self-awareness. And so I'm going to ask you to consider a couple of questions. And the first question that I'd like you to think about is, where's your energy going? What is it that drains your energy? And you may want to make a quick note of this diagram or drag it off the slides when they're shared later on this week. I'd like you to think about, what events impact you in what way, and what do you do to solve them? So let me give you an example from a draining perspective. Let's just say I've had that tough Zoom day. Things didn't quite go as I want them to. I come off the call, my partner walks up to me, and guess what? I'm wired. And we have an argument. Actually, the first thing he says to me really annoys me. So we have an argument. And how do I respond? What's the impact on me? Well, for me personally, it's mental, emotional, and physical. So I'll tighten up. I'll have certainly some emotional feelings, and I might well say to myself, or I might say out loud, I can't believe you're being like this. How selfish are you? Do you not know I've had a tough day? And what will I do about it? Well, that will vary on a day-to-day basis, but let's just say I'm kind of holding things together, and I recognise in that moment a bit of wisdom pops into my head and says, go out, go for a walk, wait a while, allow things to just ease off so that we don't build on that energy drainage. Or maybe enough sleep drains my day. And again, we've got all sorts of impacts going on. And maybe the message that I'm saying to myself is, why me? Why, when I need sleep the most, do I find it so elusive? And what do I do about it? Well, maybe I leave work early and get that early night in, which may or may not solve my issue. And I really encourage you to think about, what is it in your life that steals your energy, drains it, leaks away, taking it without you necessarily realizing? And what about the balance between what's draining your energy and then what's renewing or re-energizing you? And again, think about, what are the actions or activities or events in your life that act as renewing, that act as battery replenishers? So, for example, maybe going out with friends. And the impact is one of appreciation of the space and happiness, talking to people that I really like. Or maybe my boss sent me a note telling me I'd done a great job. And I get that sense of accomplishment of a job well done. I feel a bit more valued. My confidence takes a bit of a boost. So again, create a list for yourself to understand what's renewing you, what's re-energizing you, and see how your balance is. It would be an interesting exercise to run over half a day, or a day maybe, where you're seeing which boxes are getting hooked the most. The one on the red with all its energy drains, or the one in the green with all its renewing experiences. If we can't start to engage at this level, it becomes very tough for us to understand us and what can we do about us. The choices become more elusive. We need to start getting to grips with what's impacting us. And similarly, it's really important that we look a little deeper than we often look, in terms of, where does our resilience come from? Where are we building that base? Well, physical resilience is discussed a lot, and we see gyms, exercise, and so on and so forth being really promoted. And yet by the time we're experiencing some challenge, so let's say I have a long-term stress issue, which perhaps is creating a skin irritation, so it's showing at a physical level, we know it's already travelled through some of the other domains, because sitting under the physical level is that mental level. So once again, mental well-being has something that's been high on the agenda. And what are we doing for our mental well-being? What are we doing? This is about us taking responsibility for us. So what are we doing? And this side of my diagram is much easier, because maybe we're doing some strength training or some flexibility training. Maybe we're putting some learning in, or creating some mental flexibility, or practicing allowing ourselves to understand multiple points of view. But it's not enough, because we then need to understand that emotion is one of the big keys in here. So when we think about, what are we doing for our emotional well-being? How much are we involved in self-regulation? Or do the emotions just come along and hijack us, because by the time we realise that we're in an emotive state, they've just taken control? What about our spirituality? Yep, we all have one of these. And when we're talking about spirituality, we're talking about understanding, who am I? What makes me tick? What are my values? What do I absolutely believe in? And how tolerant am I of others? What are you doing to help yourself with your emotional and your spiritual well-being? And you may be thinking, that's all well and good. What's this got to do with the workplace? What's this got to do with sustainability? Well, when we think about stress, we also need to think about performance. And what I'd just like to take you through is a little diagram here that first came into being through a couple of psychologists in 1908. And it's known as the Yerkes-Dodson law. And it has been tested and proven time and time again. And it once again dispels very clearly the myth that I operate best when I'm on. And there are some stages of challenge that are really good for us. So having no pressure at all, so when we're in that corner which is low, is often referred to as the rust zone. Having nothing to do at all, no purpose in life whatsoever, also stresses us. So we need something going on, a bit of healthy pressure, something for us to really engage with to help us move forward. But we also need to know when we're at our optimal performance, because when we slide into the zone, we need to be super aware, because that's when we're performing at our best. But that can also be the point where if we have any vulnerability running, well, we don't say no because we want to stay on top for longer than is possible. And if we're not careful, we slide into what's known as the hyperreactive stage. So those early stages of stress that we talked about earlier. And if we keep going, because we now have to keep going because we've made all these promises and we can't possibly say no, because what will people think of me? We get into this emotional and physical exhaustion, driving, if we're not careful, to some serious health damage and breakdown. And it's at that point that we move from homeostasis into allostasis. So we need to get really hot on knowing when we're at our peak. Now, if we start to build our resilience, if we start to focus on self-regulation, then actually we can stay at our peak for longer. But we can't stay there forever. We're not machines. We need that opportunity to rebuild, refresh, have a holiday, have a break. Now, how does this all work? How can I have a chance of self-management, of self-regulation, when you're talking about emotions hijacking us? Well, let me just show you another picture. Let's understand what's going on inside the body a little bit more. Now, we're all hopefully familiar with our heartbeat. It's always interesting to sense if you can feel your heartbeat, because there it is, quietly working away in the background, beating. And actually that beat sends a rhythm into the rest of the body, which impacts our brains, and it also impacts our nervous system. Remember earlier I told you all the systems were connected. So here we're going to start to see actually what happens on this beat-to-beat process. When we are having a heartbeat, which is covering with anxiety or stress or negative emotion or anger, we end up with a heartbeat that will give us a heart rate variability, so the beat-to-beat patterning of the heart with a trace that looks like this. Now, if you were to beat that out as a vibration on a drum, you're going to get a very irregular, chaotic beat. And it is that chaotic beat that is so important for us to understand the impact on us. Because when we send up into the brain, the area of the brain which is our primal brain, so the earliest developed brain in us, where we're looking at things like memory, for example, we'll start to look at when have we had a chaotic beat like that before and what was happening last time? And how safe are we really? And remember, that out-of-date operating system kicks off and starts to sense physical danger and prepare for physical danger when actually it may be just some work stress. But nonetheless, we're hooked. We're hooked. We can feel our heart rate start to hasten as the hormones start to develop. We can feel our gut tighten. We can feel our muscles start to tighten. We may or may not feel that our blood pressure is going up, and all sorts of other elements are happening. And one of the other elements that is really critical to understand from a performance point of view is it shuts off a big chunk of our frontal cortex. Now that's really interesting, because I would suggest that very few of us are employed today for our physical capabilities. Most of us are employed for our cortex activity. Those frontal cortexes that can problem solve and rational think, that's why we're in work. And yet when we get stressed, we're seeing an inhibitor that takes away from our cortical activity. Versus when we are in a self-regulated state, we end up with a very even beat. If you imagine we end up with a very even heart rate variability patterning, which goes into that primal brain. And the primal brain says, yeah, I'm comfortable with this beat. Hey guys, everything is okay. We're online, all systems online, and we can move into that high performance zone. So actually it's really critical that we start to control what's happening from a heart rate variability point of view by hooking into our emotions. Now, if we don't control our emotions, well, then we will become, a word that I'm about to explain in a moment, incoherent. And when we are incoherent, we can't think properly, we can't hear properly, we can't see properly, we no longer can take clear decisions, and we certainly cannot help others. So if we're really going to get to a point where we can be sustainable for ourselves and create sustainability elsewhere, well, then we need to get on top of this coherence thing, and we need to make it happen when we need it to happen. And of course, like all things, the more we practice, the better we get. So what is coherence then? What am I talking about with this word coherence? Well, it's an optimal state in which we've got heart, mind, emotions, brain, all operating as one and in balance. It will create some physiological balance. So we've got the immune system, which is so critical for us at the moment with COVID-19, hormonal system, nervous system, all of the bones, the muscles, everything coming together as one. And when we are coherent, we end up with a much more flexible mental and emotional capacity. In essence, we become the driver of ourselves rather than being driven by our emotions. How many times have you reacted to something from an emotional perspective because they caught you in the moment, only later when your wisdom comes back to have regretted that? How many times have you questioned your intuition and gone against it, only later to have regretted it? When we're in coherence, all of these things come back online. Our operating system is functioning fully, and we have an intuition that is unbelievably on the mark. There are some other benefits of coherence. So there's plenty of tracking at a health level, because this approach is used all the way across the world. So we can see things like blood pressure reduction, coming back to more of a normal capacity. Congestive heart failure improvements in asthma. I have a client who I coach who happens to have asthma, and it has got tremendous value from this. Plenty of evidence for improved calmness and well-being, which equals better sleep, more emotional stability, and certainly plenty of tracking of higher cognitive performance. So how do we get this then? How do we get into this state of coherence? How do we balance our heart rhythms so that we get the kind of heart rate variability to create coherence rather than chaos? The technique is really simple. The impact is phenomenal. And this is how we do it. And I'm going to ask you all to please, once again, practice. So again, please get yourself comfortable in your chair. Put all of your attention in the area of your heart and begin to slow your breathing down. And this time I'm going to ask us to run for a minute, and I'll just talk you through what you need to do. So with the focus in the area of your heart, center of your chest, I want you to imagine that you're breathing in through your heart, down through your diaphragm, and then into your stomach. So your tummy muscles need to relax to allow the air to really circulate. And then pull your tummy muscles in and push the air back out through your diaphragm and back out through your heart. Try and get yourself in a nice, even rhythm. Maybe it's 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out. No breath holding, just a continuous flow. If you're someone who likes sounds, or maybe you can imagine a beat of 5 in and 5 out. Or if you're visual, maybe it's the never-ending figure 8 that you see. Drawing that downstroke on the way in, and then the upstroke on the way out. So that the breath can go all the way down through the diaphragm, into the belly, and then bounce back out again. And just keep that focus in the area of your heart. Keep that breath flowing. And as you hold yourself in this space just for a moment, check in with yourself. How are you feeling? What do you sense on the inside? On average, using biofeedback, we've noted that it takes about 1.5 to 2 minutes to get into a state of coherence. The more we practice, the deeper the coherence, the faster we get there, of course. But even people that have never done it before, within 1.5 to 2 minutes will get themselves in a balanced state. Now you may have your eyes closed or your eyes open. Doesn't really matter. But this fast technique for building coherence takes such little time that I would really encourage you all to practice this at least 5 minutes a day. And it may be that you allow yourself 2 or 3 minutes on top of that before a big meeting, just to make sure that you're centered and present and that the illusion of a busy mind isn't getting in your way. And you may want to continue with that type of breathing as we move towards the end of the presentation. It really is that simple as a start point. The HeartMath guys have a whole host of techniques that you can add onto it. But if that's all you want to focus on right now, then attention in your heart and slowing your breathing down will serve you. And how do you keep this resilience into a position of sustainability? How do we become sustainable so that we can help others become sustainable? Well, we can prep ourselves. We can consciously make that choice to be sure that we start our day in the right way every day. Now, earlier I was talking about how when we're in a stress state, we'll blame. Quite often when I make a suggestion like this, the blame that I will hear back is, I don't have time. And my counter to that is, well, if you value you, and if you want to become better at what you do, well, then you just need to do a bit of prioritization. What else can we do apart from prep our day? Well, if we start to notice what drains our energy, which is why I was suggesting you keep that little chart, as soon as you've noticed there's been a drain, by taking those steps through the breathing, you can press the button and you can minimize the drain and start to re-energize with that little breathing technique. And then if we really want to sustain this, we can slot in little practices. Now, one of the things of working at home is we may not have the chat by the coffee machine, but we still do drink coffee or tea or whatever it is we drink. So while the kettle's boiling or the coffee machine is doing its thing, why not spend a minute on you? Let everything in the background continue working and just spend a minute on you. Because I think you're worth it. And if we're not careful, we end up in a situation where we just get caught in behaviours because of other people's behaviours. So I want to highlight these for you. And again, I encourage you to pull this particular piece of data off when the slides go up so that you can start to notice. When we hear shouting or attacking or bullying or retaliating or criticising or worrying, if we have a little inkling of stress in us, then that will increase our stress levels and it becomes very depleting, very draining. So just because we can see negative behaviours in others doesn't mean to say that we need to allow them to impact us. We can take that time out, we can ground ourselves with that little breathing exercise, and then we can start to become curious. We can start to become more caring. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is just such an easy switch and it's going to happen in 30 seconds, but I am suggesting that with practice, you will start to notice more, you will be less reactive, and you will become more proactive, and it will have a positive impact on the system. If we are going to be sustainable, we need to move away from an event happens, someone shouts at me, someone criticises me, I react and we get an outcome, to an event happens. I choose my response and I deliver the outcome I'm looking for. And still on the topic of sustainability, that becomes ever more important because we impact others. We impact others when we're face to face, and we impact others remotely. When we're face to face, unless we're aware, we will just allow people to walk into our thought storm and be impacted, perhaps not in the way that we intended. And when we're remote, when we're on Zoom or whatever, as we are so often these days, unless we're super present and super grounded, we don't pick up on the body language. We don't sense the impact that we're having on others. So if we really want to become sustainable, and if we really want to create a sustainable world, we have to start with us. And we have to start driving through and taking responsibility for our coherence so that we can help others in theirs. And I'm going to end so that we have some time hopefully for a few questions with this slide. This is a young lady that was taken by a journalist in one of the Syrian refugee camps, and she's about 8 or 9, and the HeartMath team were called in there by one of the big agencies, because the post-traumatic stress trauma on the kids in those camps, having seen things that we can't even begin to imagine, gave them all incontinence problems. So they were continually wetting themselves with stress. And what they did was teach these kids that actually they did have an opportunity to emotionally regulate. And what you can see in the middle of the camp there is this young girl practicing that breathing technique that you were just practicing. And I don't know about you, but if someone in those conditions can find coherence, then I think it's very attainable for all of us. I really encourage you to go and practice. And thank you very much for listening to me this afternoon and for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Sue. I'm not sure if you've attended many conferences this year where we've put some time aside to focus on something other than content, but to focus on ourselves. So has anybody got any questions, any reactions? I mean, we're a smaller group now because I think a lot of our Australian colleagues, Japanese colleagues are getting well-deserved sleep. I think we also lost some of our Indian colleagues, so we're predominantly European now. But, you know, any reactions to what you've just experienced? Anything that you would like to find out from Sue about the science behind this, about where it's actually deployed? I know in the UK, the National Health Service is using this in the emergency room to give the nurses and doctors in that environment techniques to cope with the stresses that they have. But over to you. Please feel free to just unmute and ask any question.
So let me kick off, Sue. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for this wonderful workshop. So very recognizable, and I know that it's like this. But there are two main takeaways for me personally. So the first one is that you cannot affect, or it's not completely in your hand what happens to you, but the way you respond to it, that you can tweak and twist and to have a better approach to that. So that's one, which I find very, very interesting. And also your final slide is that the heart radiates an electromagnetic field. And I know that this is happening because when you are yourself much more peaceful, happy, you see that people around you respond to that. Yeah. So that's also a very, very nice point to take as a takeaway. So thank you that much.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on both of those, Karen. We can only control us. We cannot control what happens to us.
I have a question, actually. Some other, you mentioned already taking care of a team as a manager, taking care of the people around us, or at least you focus first on yourself, but could you also share some insights on how you could help others achieving that coherence?
Well, taking them through some of the information that you've gone through, but only when you've started to understand you. The problem is we create illusions. So we do some thinking about people, and depending on how centered, how stable we are, will depend on how we react to people. So if we're in one of those days where we're having a bit of a tough time and we haven't checked in with ourselves, and we meet someone who is also having a tough time but happens to be delivering late to us, our ability to empathize and support them and be curious about why are they delivering late slips from one of caring support into one of judgment. And before we know it, we've jumped into, well, where is my, whatever it is, you promised it, what's going on, can't you know, and we're running, which will then push that person further away from us. So actually, before we even think about helping others, we really need to help us. I can't tell you how many environments I walk into where I'm given someone to coach because they don't behave very well. And we've always have to look to the boss to see what's going on, as well as what's going on in their wider life. I have a few big programs and boards that practice this heart-focused breathing before they have their meetings. And they will do it as part of the ritual of the board. So they have 5 minutes at the beginning to really sense what they sense, and then connect in so that they get a better quality board meeting. And in fact, I have just taught one of the COVID vaccine teams how to do this. So they've taken there are little biofeedback devices and a little app so that you can measure, Rodney's got one, so that you can measure and see on your phone exactly what's going on the inside. It works like a mirror, not to be competed with, because it gives you a score, and I can't tell you how many people want to compete with the score, which makes them stressed when they don't win. And so we need to then start to recognize that we need to look in the mirror and just be grateful for what we see in the mirror. And the COVID vaccine teams are significantly stressed at the moment for lots of reasons. You know, there's some good reasons and perhaps some not quite so good reasons. And so that was very helpful for them. So they, ahead of the team meetings, now practice HeartMath as well. So long answer to we have to come first.
Yeah. I want to say that you have a wonderful name for a great metaphor that is coming to my mind. It's
Thank
like I want to say thank you for harvesting as a farmer the sweetness of our heart. The sweetness, our heart sweetness. There you go. You know, like a name.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I've included HeartMath research years ago in research on the field, then talked to nieces and nephews, taught online to Indian students, so it's possible to integrate, but I'm not a certified coach. However, I just said lots of information is available for people to practice.
Yeah.
When a question for you is when it comes to consistency, you know, behavioral change. I know you can use the HeartMath device, but in this case, when using HeartMath techniques for consistency and daily tracking, you perhaps use the device, right, or not. But what I mean is that for mind-body techniques and skill transfer, how do you see the inclusion of technologies, you know, apps? For instance, some people use the bell ringing when you download an application. If you want to track yourself, but it may disrupt your focus. You know, if we have people, let's say now in this context, remote workforce, right? And then they have an assignment in this time chunk, you have to do this, right? But they need to self-regulate or use HeartMath technique or another one you may teach. So in order to remember about being by the kettle, boiling and practice, so the reminders, how do you insert ongoing practice? Like, you know, that's a challenge, I would say, in the workplace. How do you do it?
And it has to be conscious. I have to want to do it. I have to see the value in it. So I have to value me and my well-being. And as we move forward, what HeartMath is using is heart rate variability. Companies like Apple and Google are very much working in this space because from a health perspective, there is some huge links coming through to low heart rate variability and some of today's chronic diseases that just didn't exist 50 years ago, for example. So we have to take responsibility. Now, we're used to giving responsibility to other people. You know, it's my boss's job to train me. It's someone else's job to make sure I relax. It's someone else's job to make sure I eat healthily. And it'll be okay if I don't eat healthily today because I'll do it tomorrow or whatever. What we're not very good at as individuals is taking responsibility for our own well-being. You know, we might go to a class, we might go to the gym, we might find a personal trainer. We need to take it for ourselves. And then we just need to keep reminding ourselves, whether we put a post-it note there, whether we leave a little heart sweet by the kettle or whatever we do. And and I promote heart math because it's simple, but I could easily be teaching you meditation, or self-hypnosis, or any of a number of other techniques. What's really, really important is that we take enough notice of us to create sustainability for us. Because if we don't do it, no one is going to come help us. And so we have to do it. And heart math is very simple. You know, who can't put their attention on their heart and breathe? Now, for the first time you do it, you might find that doing that for 5 minutes is a challenge. Well, that's just an indicator that I've got some work to do. And with work, you'll do it for 20 minutes and fight anybody who gets in your way because of its value.
But it's also maybe something that, you know, many of us have responsibility for supervising other people or for teaching classes or whatever. Is this something that you could bring to people's attention as part of your work? Here at the WBCSD, we offer 2 90-minute sessions a week, not just in heart math, but in other areas. But what we do is that we make it possible for people to attend. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to go, but if you want to go, you know that those 2 90-minute sessions on a Monday and a Thursday are for you. And that management are really instructed to make the time available so that staff do not feel that they have to miss a week because there's another requirement. So I think you set the tone for saying to people, if this is something you want to get into the spirit of then perhaps you should. So you know, I think you can't force anybody to want to do it, but you can enable the environment that allows them to do it if they want to. And at the end of the day, I've always said that I'm only as good as the people that work for me. And whilst I can't force them to breathe deeply or to get into a state of coherence, I hope that by enabling them to do so, if they choose to, then it's a win-win outcome for them, for us, and the organization. So we're at the end of the session, but again, I'd like to just thank you all for staying with it, and for Sue for sharing her skills and her experience of this. And I just love the idea that there's boards somewhere in the world that are breathing before they make decisions. Certainly when I've reported to some boards and supervisory boards, clearly could have done with some interventions before they sat down. So this is what I think is great. And I know some of you need to leave. I know that some of you are in time zones where it's getting probably feeding time for children. So thank you so much. But for those of you that are here, we're coming to the home stretch. And I'd like to ask Karen if she'd be willing to share some of her reflections for today as the new chair of EMAN. You're on mute.
I'm almost getting used to hearing this sentence. Yeah, well, thank you, Rodney. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, everyone who was involved in this conference. It was a great success. At least I found it very, very interesting. And for me, being the new chair of EMAN, it was a pleasure, of course, to welcome you here. And I really appreciated this conference together with the World Business Council of Sustainable Development. It is a conference that we like to organize every few years to really bridge the gap between practitioners and academics. And I think we did a good job today. And I would like to give a big thank you to Rodney, to Ketia, to Johanna, and all the others within the World Business Council. So a big clapping of the hands. So thank you for all the time, the energy, the effort you have put in organizing this conference. And for the participants, it would be very nice to see you again next year. Next year it will be a bit more academic conference that academics are going to show the research they do. But if you have, as a practitioner, a very good idea to be involved in this conference, please just let us know, or my colleagues at the steering committee, because we're always very open to try new things, to bring new perspectives in. And that will be, yeah, it's also very necessary for us as academics to make sure that we do impactful research and we focus on the things that matter most. So next year's conference will virtually be in Nantes in France, and we have decided that it will, almost 100% sure, an online conference, which is a pity, of course, but we found out and we realized more and more that for the most part of the academic world, all budgets are frozen, so there is no way that people can pay to travel. And it's also very hard for us to travel, at least for people not coming from Europe. Delphine Pibachet, she will be the organizer next year. So she's located in Nantes in France, and it will be a conjunction together with the CSR France network. Also focusing on management accounting, sustainability, reporting, strategic management, all those kind of topics will be discussed. She had to leave a bit earlier today, unfortunately, so it's up to me to present the next conference. It will be our 25th anniversary, so hopefully it will be it will be, of course, a very interesting agenda, but hopefully it will be a very happily gathering again. So the organizers came up already with a few new approaches. For example, we will have speed blogging. We will do a virtual visit of the eco places. We will have different tracks, so tracks specified towards specific themes, but also a track in French for the French people, because a lot of the participants from the CSR French network, they speak French. And also here we try to bring practitioners in. So if you have any ideas, if you want to organize a workshop, please contact me or Delphine, most happy. So I learned a lot today about resilience, personally wise, but also what it could mean for the people around me, for my family, for the organization I work in. And I really wish that you will have very good months in the coming time, and that you will show resilience, and that you will be able to be resilient, not only as a person, but also in your organization. And I hope that we will keep up the good work to work on sustainability and to make this world a better place. So I think it's time now for the virtual drinks. And Rodney, I would like to hand over for the final closing words. Thank you all.
There we go. Thanks, Karen. And I would also just like to extend a huge thank you to Katia and Joanna, because it was they that made this possible. It was a lot more work than I think they anticipated when I said, would you mind helping out? So thank you to them and for all of you. So I don't really have much more to say other than leave you with a poem that I came across during lockdown that I've actually used when I was teaching recently at the MBA class at Yale, and many people found it very helpful. So it's a poem called The Same Boat by Julie Sheldon, and I've taken some creative license and changed the words a little bit. So here goes. We're going to have music as well. Hopefully you can hear that. So we're all in the same boat, they say, but I would disagree. There's so many different sailing boats upon this stormy sea. Some sail in ocean liners in comfort, style and ease, relaxing on their balconies, sipping their G&Ts. Some speed along in motorboats as if it's all okay, with little care for smaller craft that might get in their way. Some struggle on their battleships, there's nothing going right, endlessly preparing for the next relentless fight. And some huddle in their lifeboats and pray that they'll be saved, hoping for a calmer sea and fearing every wave. And some drift around upon the rafts that barely stay afloat. They're praying for a change of luck and a chance to board a boat. And some haven't found their sea legs yet and dread each wave and swell they're struggling to stay upright and don't feel very well. So whilst you're on your journey to a safe and calmer port, look out for fellow sailors who may need some support. Could you throw them a life belt or a paddle or an oar? Perhaps you could help guide them a bit nearer to the shore. So I hope your time at the EMAN event today has made you realise what is possible and needed for your career and research to thrive. So what kind of boat are you sailing in? Is it profits at all cost? Or are you open to the possibility that means we're not all lost? And remember, none of you can sail a boat if you don't take care of yourself. If you want to get to a calmer shore, if you want to get others with you to a calmer shore, then you need to take care of yourself. And remember, resilience is not just risk management, but it's about taking care of how you feel and how you practice. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you do have time to stay, I have a beer that's chilled that I'm looking forward to. If not, we'll see you next year online, hosted this time by Nant. And once again, to Katya and Joanna, thank you so much for everything you did to make this possible. There we go.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Quick word before we end this. It would be great if we get to get your feedback on this event. So I've just dropped in now the link to the survey. And as Ronnie just mentioned, for those of you that can stay, we will be doing virtual networking drinks. So this is a really nice opportunity to continue some of the discussions we've had throughout the day. Also have hopefully some more informal discussions. I'm not going to lie, I'm quite brain dead at this point. So if you can stay on for that, that would be wonderful. We'll start at 5:50 so that you have enough time to go grab your beer, cocktail, whatever it is that you fancy to drink at this point. So here's thanks again, and hope to see some of you guys in just a few minutes.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.